Russia, there is a good modicum of ability to live their lives in accordance with their freedom. But in the name of anti-terrorism and anti-separatism, the Russian government also has cracked down on some Muslims, some minority groups, and we understand legitimate concerns about terrorism. Here we support countries dealing with them, but when they crack down by cracking down on peaceful religious practice as kind of an inoculation against letting anything flourish that might lead down a path that they fear towards this, it really becomes problematic.
It is a very difficult line to draw, what you're talking about.
It is.
Because in Russia, they, I mean, as I say, I've met with religious leaders, in my last couple of visits, and the Mormons, even the Mormons said, oh no, we're fine, we can knock on doors and seek converts, and the only group that was complaining were the Scientologists, which of course is a question in Germany as well, and but in terms of trying to deal with the Islamic threat at a time, we realize it's very easy to see our friends in Saudi Arabia have been sponsoring mosques in order to promote radical Islam, and changing the society, and not just to get together to help people worship God together. And this is where you draw that line of how you deal with people who are trying to manipulate the Islamic faith towards a political radical end. That's a very difficult line to draw.
We agree it's a difficult line to draw. And clearly one of the tests ought to be where peaceful people are acting peaceably. They ought to be allowed to live in accordance with their religious conscience. Here, where they are violating laws here that have to do with criminal activity and terrorist activity, then those should be addressed directly about it. We have found in a number of countries, including Russia, that is an overbroad crackdown on segments of the community. And they also have a registration process that can be tough. There are smaller groups, Jehovah's Witnesses, other groups, who really are feeling enormous pressure.
That was the second group that was
here, and here, in this regard as well. So some of the smaller groups are really having problems. And you have the same thing if you're talking about those categories of countries. In China, China still only recognizes 5 major faiths. Here, if you're not one of those faiths, you risk going to jail if you try to function.
I was just about to bring up China, so thank you for that analysis. One last note on China. Yes, they have to be part of those 5 recognized faiths, but do we not also still see a massive repression of, for example, the Falun Gong in China? Wouldn't that be under the umbrella of a religious freedom?
I mean, it's why I named it in my testimony here. There are still thousands of Falun Gong in prison, including most of their leadership. Here, many of them are in prisons where we do not know where they are here, and their families and their lawyers can contact it. There are many reported stories of torture and deaths in prison here, but this we're seeing similar kinds of repression vis-a-vis the Tibetan Buddhists and the Uyghur Muslims. And as I said last in Vietnam, it's uneven around the country. There are some places the government hand is lighter, and you see religious publishing houses and social services, and there are other places in unregistered churches able to function. But in the main in China, unregistered churches are always in danger of being arrested. And we have this extraordinary situation in Wenzhou, where one of the deepest concentration of Christians in one area in China, where they're pulling down crosses over hundreds, about 1,500 churches, and demolishing churches in the name of urban reclamation here. And they talk about it being only a small percentage of all the buildings, but 1,500 out of the 6,000 churches there is 20% of all the churches have been affected by this. And it's a clear effort to kind of repress the visible presence of the growing resurgence of religion of religious life in China.
Well, thank you very much for giving us that insight of that type of repression.
Thank you. Chairman Robacker?
This is one day
Thank you for coming.
After publishing spiritual headlines.
Good to be with you.
I got two real quick questions, so if you'll, I know Mark wants to go, so we'll go fast. First one's really easy. We read the information. We don't see anything about Mormons. And you know, Mormons, they can get mocked on on Broadway, and it doesn't matter. So I'm just curious. No one ever mentions them. There's, I think, millions of Mormons around the world. You never stumble across it, or it's off the radar, or what's the story there? It wasn't a trick question. I'm not.
No.
I'm just curious because of my own ancestors.
I respect that.
If you don't know, you don't know. You can let me know another time. It's okay.
I'm pausing because I want to say something. I want to phrase what I'm saying complimentary about the Mormon Church. They are, because of their practice of young men and some women voluntarily going on mission, they have worked out more successfully than most religious groups a modus operandi to work with the powers that be here as effectively or more effectively than any other religious group that I can think of. They tend to run into problems, therefore. They try to play by whatever the rules are in a different country, and they're not as likely to push the envelope. So there are a score of countries I could name that do not allow any kind of religious expression other than the one that is the state-endorsed religious expression. Disproportionately, these are Muslim countries in which Mormon would be arrested if they went around doing the normal missionizing that they do. And since they don't tend to push the envelope and test this, but recognize that that's not a country at this point they're able to function in,
right.
They tend to run into this. That's why, of course.
Right, no, I mean, I know. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto the Lord what is the Lord's.
Indeed.
It's a good approach, irrespective. Now, let me ask one other question real briefly. I've read the material. I see you speaking. I look at the world in terms of global trade, and I struggle, and I like what you're doing. I like the program. Because people ought to be able to go to church and kneel down and pray to whatever God. But it never seems to really impact any trade, and therefore anybody's bottom line. If you're China, you're billions of dollars every month to the U.S. to Walmart. If you're the oil producers, none of that ever gets impacted. Cuba's opening up. It feels like this is a program, at a big picture level, I'm saying, no one's bottom line with respect to trade is ever impacted, even though we're the world's growth engine. So what are we really doing here? And what am I missing about that? Because all the countries that you mentioned, there's a lot of Nike shoes being made in Vietnam. And all the toys and electronics are coming from China. They're the factory of the world. And whether they abuse folks' religious freedoms or not seems to mattereth not to the bottom line, which everyone respects. Am I missing the big picture completely here, or are we kind of, it's got to be a frustrating job for you. Tell me if I'm missing something here, because...
You raised two issues here. Let me just say this, because it's been alluded to in some of the other comments. We are all committed to religious freedom, and that includes not only the right to worship. It includes the right to talk about your faith, to change your faith, to proselytize others. It includes, as someone said quite appropriately, the right not to believe as well. It is a broad right that goes beyond just the right to worship. Here, look, the system
Are we moving the needle?
In some countries we are. In other countries we are not. Here, and we try to do everything we can to move the needle by strengthening the ability of religious groups to advocate for their rights, to work with civil society. We try to do it by our direct bilateral relations with these countries to improve rule of law issues on that. There are some countries we make real progress, other countries are much harder. We do use economic levers on this. There are a range of countries that are subject to sanctions. So for instance, in Iran, that it is restricts a whole number of religious communities. We've lifted one set of sanctions, but all the human rights and religious freedom sanctions remain in place, and nothing under this agreement stops us from imposing more if the situation deteriorates even further than it does. There's a whole range of countries in which we do apply both human rights in general and religious freedom, particularly restraints sometimes in trade, other financial restraints, access to banking here, and other things that affect either the government or organizations that are involved in this violation of human rights, or individuals who are involved in these rights. They are fairly robust here, and over a long period of time, we think they are part of the picture of what we can do to change the pattern of some of these repressive policies and practices that countries have.
I thank you. I mean, I think a lot of us have ancestors that were religious freedom migrants.
I can assure you that's true.
And so it means something to us, and therefore it means something to folks in other countries that lose one of the most cherished rights of all. So we appreciate what you're doing. I'm frustrated sometimes by our lack of economic will, but I certainly have nothing but respect and admiration for what you're doing, and I yield back.
I really appreciate that. As somebody who is part of a religious group that has known this kind of oppression time and again, century after century, we know the price of what happens when good people stand idly by, and this nation is committed not to repeat that mistake that has been made so many times before. So thank you.